Did you know that there are hidden signs you're suffering from narcissistic abuse? They are so subtle that you might not even realize that you've been abused. Brushing off certain behaviors as part of everyday life is easy, but they can be red flags pointing to something much deeper. Narcissistic abuse doesn't always show up with loud arguments or dramatic outbursts. It's often sneaky, creeping into your life in ways you may not notice at first. Today, we're going to uncover 10 signs that you might be dealing with narcissistic abuse. Are you ready for number 1? Memory gaps. You might find yourself struggling to remember specific events or conversations, especially ones tied to narcissistic abuse. It's not your memory failing. It's your brain trying to protect you. Psychiatrist Dr. Judith Herman explains in her book Trauma and Recovery that trauma forces the mind to disconnect from experiences that are too overwhelming to process. So, your memory gaps are your mind's way of shielding you from pain, like putting those memories in a box and tucking them away in a corner of your brain where they won't hurt as much. But these gaps can feel frustrating, as if puzzle pieces are missing from your story. You might forget details of arguments or entire periods when things were especially tough. It happens because narcissists create such a chaotic and emotionally draining environment that your brain struggles to keep up. Psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula explains in her book, Should I Stay or Should I Go?, that narcissists thrive on creating confusion and doubt, which can make you feel disconnected from reality. The constant stress overloads your mind, making storing or recalling memories harder. As you heal, those gaps might not fill, but you can learn to create new, positive memories that don't carry the weight of the past. Let's talk about number 2. Obsessive overthinking. Obsessive overthinking after narcissistic abuse feels like being trapped in a loop, replaying events and blaming yourself. Psychologist Ramani Durvasula explains in her book, Should I Stay or Should I Go?, that narcissists create this cycle by making you believe everything is your fault. Your brain gets stuck in overanalysis, trying to find answers to avoid future mistakes. This habit is your mind's way of coping with chaos, but it keeps you emotionally tied to the abuse. In her book, Trauma and Recovery, psychiatrist Judith Herman says, overthinking is how the brain tries to regain control in an uncontrollable situation. The good news is, this isn't your fault. It's a response to manipulation. Recognizing the pattern is the first step toward breaking free and rebuilding your self-esteem. Let's move on to number 3. Difficulty concentrating. Difficulty concentrating after narcissistic abuse feels like your brain is stuck in a fog. The constant stress and manipulation consume so much energy that focusing becomes hard. Canadian physician Gabor Mate explains in his book, The Myth of Normal, that chronic stress makes it harder for your brain to stay present or process information. This fog isn't because you're lazy. It's your mind trying to cope with emotional exhaustion. Narcissists make it worse by keeping you confused and draining your mental energy. Dr. Peter Levine explains that trauma puts your body on high alert, leaving little space for clear thinking. Understanding this helps you start healing, as lowering stress can clear the fog and improve your focus. Now, let's continue to number 4. Ignoring red flags. Ignoring red flags in a toxic relationship happens because you want to believe the best in someone. You may dismiss hurtful behaviors with excuses like, they're just stressed, or maybe I overreacted. It is often because the narcissist conditions you to doubt your instincts. American psychoanalyst Robin Stern explains in his book The Gaslight Effect that narcissists twist your perception of reality, making you question what's expected. Over time, you might ignore your gut feelings to avoid conflict, even though something feels off. This pattern is a survival mechanism, not a flaw in you. Recognizing it and trusting your instincts again is key to breaking free and reclaiming your power. You shouldn't miss number 5. Walking on eggshells. Walking on eggshells means constantly adjusting your behavior to avoid upsetting the narcissist. You start fearing their reactions, whether it's anger, silence, or manipulation, and you suppress your own needs. Clinician Shari Manning explains in her book, The Emotionally Abusive Relationship, that this happens when a narcissist controls your emotions, making their reactions feel unpredictable. Over time, you become hyper-aware of their moods, walking on edge to keep the peace. This behavior forces you to prioritize the narcissist's emotions over your own, leaving you exhausted. Extensively published scholar Jennifer Fried discusses in her book, Betrayal, Trauma, how emotional abuse creates fear and unpredictability. Recognizing this pattern helps you break free and start prioritizing your peace. Are you still up for number 6? Overworking to prove worth. When you're suffering from narcissistic abuse, you might throw yourself into work as a way to avoid facing the emotional pain. You may believe that if you achieve more or get noticed, it will finally prove your worth to the narcissist or others. American psychiatrist David D. Burns explains in The Feeling Good Handbook that tying your self-worth to external achievements creates a cycle of stress. No amount of overworking will ever fill the emotional void caused by narcissistic abuse. Overworking can also be a way to distract yourself from the constant anxiety and uncertainty in your personal life. Laura Berman, a professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and psychiatry, suggests that using work as validation prevents you from addressing real emotional issues. Recognizing this pattern helps you shift focus from external achievements to healing and self-validation. Let's keep it moving to number 7. Excessive defensiveness. Excessive defensiveness happens when you interpret neutral comments as personal attacks. After dealing with a narcissist, you become used to constant criticism, making you hypervigilant and ready to defend yourself. Patricia Evans, a leading expert on verbal abuse and its effects, explains in her book, The Verbally Abusive Relationship, that constant verbal abuse teaches you to be on guard all the time. It leads you to overreact to even harmless comments. Dr. John Gottman, a relationship expert, says defensiveness is a natural reaction to criticism, but it can shut down communication. This defense mechanism blocks your ability to process things calmly. Recognizing this pattern helps you respond more objectively and break the cycle. Here comes number 8. Adopting the narcissist's traits. When you're around a narcissist, you might start adopting their traits without realizing it. You might mirror their behaviors or opinions to fit in or avoid conflict. Dr. Craig Malkin, a lecturer in psychology for Harvard Medical School, explains in his book Rethinking Narcissism, explains that narcissistic abuse creates trauma bonding, making you internalize your abuser's behaviors. Over time, this mirroring becomes a coping mechanism to deal with the emotional chaos. Adopting their traits can make you lose sight of your identity as you focus more on aligning with them. Dr. Linda Martinez-Louis, a clinical expert on the narcissistic personality, psychotherapist, and author, points out that this can lead to confusion about who you indeed are. Recognizing this pattern helps you separate your true self from what you've adopted to please the narcissist. Moving on to number 9. Hoarding secrets. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you might start hoarding secrets, hiding your struggles from others. You may feel you can't trust anyone or worry about being judged. Clinical psychologist and author Sherry Campbell explains in her book, "But It's Your Family," that narcissistic abuse makes you feel isolated, leading you to keep things to yourself. This emotional burden grows as you hide your true feelings. Hoarding secrets might protect you temporarily, but it causes more anxiety and disconnection. Dr. Jennifer Freed points out that the fear of vulnerability makes you retreat inwardly, even when you need support. Recognizing this habit and opening up to trusted people is key to healing from narcissistic abuse. Finally, we're down to number 10. Fear of abandonment. When you're in a narcissistic relationship, the fear of abandonment can make you cling to toxic connections. You might stay in these unhealthy situations because you're terrified of being alone. Clinical psychologist, professor, speaker, and author Alexandra Solomon explains in her book, Loving Bravely, that narcissists make you feel like your worth depends on your abuser's approval. This fear makes you stay in relationships, even when you know they're damaging. The longer you stick with them, the deeper the fear of abandonment becomes, creating a vicious cycle. A renowned psychiatrist in Virginia Beach, Laura Dabney, notes that narcissistic abuse makes you feel insecure and dependent, reinforcing the belief that you can't survive without their validation. Recognizing that you deserve healthier relationships is crucial. Being alone doesn't mean you're unworthy. It's difficult to spot these signs, especially when wrapped up in subtle, everyday behaviors. But now that you know what to look for, you'll better understand what's going on in your life. If any of these signs sound familiar, it might be time to look closely at your relationships and consider your emotional well-being. Remember, you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, not manipulation and control. If you're ready to take back your power, don't hesitate to reach out for help or start setting boundaries. You're not alone in this. There's always support when needed.